Tristan Gillen, co-founder of GREX AI and Growth Division. Thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure to be here. Yeah, thanks for the invite, Sam.
Nice. Well, Tristan, before we kind of dive in, it'd be good to get a bit of an intro about you, kind of what you're up to at the moment, what GREX is, and then what we'll do is we'll dive straight into some community questions.
Sounds good. Yeah. I suppose just as a little bit of context around my background. So I first actually founded, ran, grew, and sold a startup back in 2019. That was a mobile pre-order and payment app startup. So I've kind of been there as a founder, going through the challenges of going to market with my own product, albeit the idea was great. It was a little bit too early. It wasn't really like the massive exit that we wanted it to be, but it was still a really fun journey, and I learned a hell of a lot about what it takes to take a product to market. And it was that passion for going to market that led me to found Growth Division, which I've been running for the last 7 years. Growth Division is a growth marketing agency working with startups, scale-ups, and ambitious SMEs to help them go to market by putting together expert fractional growth teams for them. So on our roster, we have some of the top tier SEO, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, content marketing, you name it, across the entire stack of channels. We've got experts, and we basically put them in to form custom growth teams for the startups that we work with. Over the last 7 years, we worked with some amazing names, built some really cool case studies of helping to scale startups and scale ups into hundreds of millions in revenue in some cases. And I've taken that experience of building and growing over 150 startups through Growth Division into now building GREX, which is our AI growth operating system that now underpins the way that we operate at Growth Division, but it's also a separate entity that we're now going to market with. Essentially, it allows marketers to run a more efficient approach to working within their workflows and growing their business. And yeah, there's some exciting stuff happening there. So excited to get into this conversation and talk a little bit more around how marketers are using AI at the moment to scale and make themselves more efficient.
Nice, dude. Yeah, I love that you're a fellow. I hope this doesn't offend you, scrappy kind of marketer at the ground level, but that you've kind of like put these like Navy SEAL teams, growth teams together to kind of see what's working, what's not. I always find it much better working with like a few specialists rather than getting like general pools of knowledge, right? It's like kind of that thing in software. It's like you want a 10x developer over 10 developers because they just get so much more done. So try and track that.
Yeah, that was actually the founding of Growth Division, actually, was that like when we were working with our first business, we were trying to do a lot of the different marketing channels ourselves. And we were kind of working with like sort of what I would say generalist marketers. And the moment we brought in channel specific experts to run and operate the channels, they were freelancers and they were only working part-time for us, but they came in and they basically turned a switch. They put in place quick wins that they know work across, their years of experience and multiple other channels that they work with and clients that they work with, And they could quickly validate the channel to market and allow us to understand where we should be placing our marketing budget, which obviously at that startup phase is relatively scarce, so you have to be super clever about it. So just putting in those experts was the thing that really was the light bulb moment for us, and that's where the model of Growth Division actually came from. And now we know that you put in this expert, they can quickly put in place their quick wins and scale the channel pretty quickly.
For sure. So this actually kind of ties into some of the first questions, but just on that then, did you typically find that they would come to you and it would be on you, Tristan, to kind of figure out what channel they need? Or do typically most growth teams come to you knowing? Because, all right, let's just kind of jump straight into it. Challenge one is most marketers know they need to use AI, but don't know where to start. What's kind of like the first workflow you'd actually automate and why? But yeah, I'm curious of how much I guess it varies, is on them versus on your guidance of...
Yeah. A lot of the time, I would say the person heading up the go-to-market, so whether that is a founder in the early stages or, an early hire for the head of marketing role, they, of course, have some sort of sense for which channels to market are going to work to drive growth. They've got some instincts, they've learned what works by hacking around a little bit internally. But the problem is that I often see with the sort of typical agency model is that you might go to like a specialist agency. Let's say they're running, LinkedIn ads. Of course, they're going to tell you that you should be running LinkedIn ads, right? There's that natural bias that they have because that's just what they sell. That's what they know. And so a lot of the time you end up getting directed poorly because people are answering your question of what channel should I run with a bias behind it. So what a kind of our model and Growth Division's model is, and the way that I think you should do it is like internally or with a neutral sort of strategist, work out what channels should be ones that you focus on with an unbiased perspective, right? Someone comes in and says, well, actually, you should be running, LinkedIn ads, but in combination with direct outreach with content marketing. And you build that channel marketing strategy from a sort of neutral perspective. And then you go out and hire the relevant experts with that in mind. So that's the typical way I would do it, is kind of try and build it with sort of an experienced strategist that, has years of experience building strategies for startups, whether it's in a fractional CMO role or they're a CMO you've hired.
Well, on that one then, perfect. Leading into that first question yet again, AI buzzword, you are building AI tool that helps, obviously streamline a lot of this and deliver value in lots of different dimensions. What is the first workflow that you would automate when it comes to, and maybe automation isn't the right application of AI, maybe
Well,
not, but
it's definitely an interesting application of AI and something that is, I'm seeing some businesses drive unbelievable efficiencies in their approach to their go-to-market because of the ability to now automate and connect up various tools. But I would actually push back a little bit on that, the wording of that question, and say, actually, I wouldn't start with a workflow at all. I would start with what a lot of people are now calling your sort of AI marketing brain, which is basically you have to build this context layer in your go-to-market or in your marketing for any workflows to be useful in the first place. And honestly, this is the first true unlock. I've been speaking with a number of CMOs for scale-ups and some pretty big brands, and they've been saying that as soon as they've built this context layer, this AI marketing brain that their team have access to, and often that context layer sits on top of an underlying LLM like Claude. Most people are using Claude nowadays. That's the big unlock for the rest of the team, because then the AI that they're using is becoming far more valuable and powerful. And then you can start to build agents off the back of that sort of context layer that you've actually built. So I would say that that's actually the first true unlock. And the way that I kind of see it is, the innovators adoption curve, where you have sort of the innovators and then the early adopters, then the early majority and the late majority, right? So I would say that the innovators are the guys that are even building their own AI applications. They're building custom CRMs and they're automating entire channels to market. The early adopters are the ones building some sort of agentic workflows and automating significant parts of their job. The early majority are more people who are just playing around with Claude. They've built this AI marketing brain. They're starting to use skills. They're starting to use co-work. And then the late majority are just those guys who are just basically searching in the LLMs and maybe producing some content off the back of it. So I think you have to go through those chronologically. You have to start with the kind of that first step of like just searching within and using it as a search tool and a content generation tool. Then you have to take that next layer, which is like, okay, let's build this AI marketing brain that connects all of our marketing knowledge and go-to-market knowledge. And then it's like build workflows. And then it's, the next step, which is fully automating some areas of the channels that you're operating.
Nice. There's so much to unpack there. And it also got me thinking about my friends, and also like it's easy to get caught because I work with like developers all the time, like in an echo chamber, and most of them are the innovators, like the bootstrapped kind of innovators. And I've never broken it up using that framework. Is it Crossing the Chasm? I think that's the book, isn't it? It's a good book, but actually, I won't go off piece there. Okay, great answer. I think automation is an easy one to start with because it's such an easy ROI comparison, right? Like if you're trying to get that over the board, like, oh, we've saved X amount of hours. But you are right. I think the more value comes from that context layer.
Yeah. And to be fair, like I didn't actually answer your question. So if you were pushing me to answer the question of like, what would you automate first in terms of a workflow? I mean, of course, AI is really good at some things and it's not that great at other things, right? And so everyone knows it's pretty strong at like content generation and content-based channels. And so just generating content from, Claude, once you've given it a bit of context, it's okay, but it's a little bit generic. Once you start to layer on a bit more of that context layer that I've just been talking about, maybe you're plugging in some playbooks that work within that channel that you're operating, then it gets even more powerful. So like some automation of content-based systems can be really powerful. So, you plug in your strategy, you plug in your weekly research that your agent can go and do. Then it builds your content briefs for the upcoming month for your LinkedIn profile. Then you sign off on those briefs. Then you actually get the system to write the content for those briefs. Then you get the system to create the creative assets for those briefs. This is all possible APIs through Canva. You put in creative assets that you can create there. And then you can obviously final sign off from the human, and then you schedule it. That's a pretty automated workflow that I've of course set up, but it's quite an easy starting point to get you going.
I think that's also a really good point. So we had a guy called Sarab on here. I can't remember where he works at. His question, and you'll get a chance to ask a question to the next guest, was what was like the most underrated metric that you're not tracking? And then Chelsea Wells, she works at Master Control. She mentioned about content utilization, or it could have been vice versa. Charlie, anyway, and it like I looked into it a bit deeper, and there was like this metric where 30%, 70% of content marketing create doesn't get used by sales, and 30% of sales' time is personalizing or like changing the content marketing has made for each kind of customer, which obviously is a colossal inefficiency. So yeah, that's also other LLMs are available, although best. Right, Tristan, sorry, that was a slide, but we'll do a bit more quick fire. Challenge 2, evaluating what works. Once you've picked that first workflow, how do you evaluate whether AI is actually doing it better than a human was? So I guess we take that example of the automation piece of the content.
Yeah, so there's two key things you need to think about here. The first is it actually saving me time? So how many hours a week is this saving me? And then the second one is it actually driving as good or better results than I was previously able to do with my sort of more manual workflow? So again, it comes back to making sure that you're really data driven around, what your results were previously. Now you've implemented this system. What does the improvement look like? And from what we're building in GREX, we're seeing about a 3x multiple on sort of efficiency gain in terms of hours saved on a weekly basis when implementing some of the workflows that we put in. Sometimes it can be considerably more. That's just a sort of average across different workflows. And then the results one is still a little bit tricky because you're very dependent on. It's still quite early actually in where you're like automating a lot of different workflows. So we're still yet to see like massive improvements on results, but that's, the trajectory we're going on is to see better results. So look, the main thing I always say is that whatever you're doing, you need to make sure you're having an impact on your North Star growth metric, right? Like that's the really important thing is like, is this driving better results or is this saving me time and driving better results? It's those two things. So tracking that is hyper important.
Yeah, that's nice to tie it back to the North Star. I mean, I get caught in this Claude terminal way too much using Claude, and I feel good. And I compare it to like writing blog posts back in the day. It's much nicer to keep writing blog posts because it feels like deep, amazing work but it might have been better to write one good blog post and spend all your time distributing it, right?
Yeah.
The feel good stuff.
Like, I honestly think with all of this automation and AI, like we should be like, only working 2 hours a day, right? Like, according to all of this logic, but actually most people are working more than ever at the moment, trying to scramble to keep up. And part of the reason for that is that they are kind of keeping all of the stuff that they're generating in Claude and not pushing it live. They're not getting actual stuff out the door. And I think that's a big problem is just, people kind of getting stuck in their workflows and not generating actual results off the back of it. And, commenting on like LinkedIn posts, getting Claude skills DM'd into their LinkedIn and, they've got 10 of these unread messages that they need to come back to. And then they eventually have time and they go and mess around with them, right? There's a lot of like messing around at the moment because there's a whole load of uncertainty over the best practice of using, this new amazing thing, AI. So I think there's a lot of messing around still and, a lot of discovery that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Walker, I've raved about it a bit too much. He's going to think I'm an absolute fanboy, but I was chatting to him about his book and he's got a logic on this as well, where it's like the whole, we're going from the knowledge economy, just like we went from the industrial economy to the knowledge worker to now this frequency era, which is what he's branding it. But it's like also people are burning out because they're trying to out knowledge. Like the game was always knowledge, like who knows what, how can post what, but you're trying to out knowledge AI. So we're spending so much in this terminal to kind of produce more and more and more. And actually, it's not really doing anything to the top line, arguably, unless of course, you're attached to that North Star metric.
Exactly.
Right. Apologies again, Tristan. We are behind schedule, but it's fine. Scaling without breaking. What's the biggest mistake you see teams make when they try to scale from one AI workflow to building out a full system? So I think when we spoke before prior to this, you try and start with one piece anyway, don't you? And then build it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally going one at a time is the best way to do it, but I think the biggest mistake is just a lack of connectivity. So where you're not sharing context across your different workflows and data gets siloed. I mean, marketing technology, like the MarTech landscape, is notoriously fragmented. Data is extraordinarily siloed across loads of different tooling. And now, with the advent of MCPs and this hyper level of connectivity, you need to make sure that all of your tools are talking to each other. You are connecting everything up. Ideally, you have this kind of central database where you're normalizing all of this data, feeding it into your favorite LLM, and then building your workflows off the back of that. It's going back to the AI brain, making sure that that's properly set up and all of your learnings are stored in a single place, not just I'm running direct outreach on this AI tool, I'm using this AI CRM system, I'm, got my analytics up here and my, content marketing tooling down here. All of that needs to be connected into a centralized knowledge base.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I'm going to come back to that one because I know there's a question that loops back to this. Challenge 4 is human versus machine. So we've kind of been discussing it loosely throughout these questions, but like, where do you draw the line? Obviously, you're building this wicked AI tool. Where do you draw the line with what AI should fully like automate or do? And where do you still think humans need to be in the loop? And I guess also, if possible, maybe tie this to future activity. Like what does the future kind of like look like over the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's just worth noting to anyone watching, this is recorded in July 2026, because I always have to do that because of the pace of change and like how outdated things can get. But firstly, at this moment in time, I would actually hesitate to fully automate most systems and workflows. For me, best practice still looks like you've got a human in the loop. In real best practice, I would actually say you should have an expert in the loop. So we talked about that content system earlier. You ideally want to have a LinkedIn content expert in the loop there, signing off on the strategy, signing off on the content briefs, signing off on the actual posts before they go live, because you need to have that person who's accountable to run that workflow, who understands what good looks like and who can oversee it. So for me, I still think you actually do still need an expert in the loop most of the time before you're kind of actually getting outputs live into the world.
Hope for humanity. We love that. For now, in July 2026.
Exactly.
Challenge 5, proving it to leadership. So if a marketing leader came to you today and said, look, I've got 90 days to show that, we've implemented AI and it's making a difference. Or I like to say, hey, we've just tried this, but, and it hasn't worked, but here's like our hypothesis proven. Like, what would you tell them to do and where to start?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the answer depends a little bit on your starting point in the first place. If you're, and again, like that adoption curve sort of innovator curve that I talked about earlier, it depends a little bit on where your team are at. So if your marketing team are, you've all got a shared Claude instance, you've connected some stuff up to it, but you haven't got a true AI brain that sits on top of it as the context layer, I would say first step is go and get that implemented. And that's going to be that immediate unlock for your team's ability to use and leverage AI more efficiently. It's quite difficult to actually show the proof of that back to the board, because, they'll be looking at like, where's the output, where's the results, where's the efficiency and time saving, and actually just that context layer. It's improving quality of output, but the other results based outputs are actually quite hard to track and measure. But it's vital to getting that set up before you start using AI in a sort of more advanced capacity by building out workflows, etc. And when you do start to build out workflows, if you're in that next stage of sort of AI adoption, that's when it becomes quite easy to show the board, look, this is the specific improvements that we've had in results by running this system. This is the specific number of hours that we've saved by running this system. So that stuff is actually much more easy to prove. And that's why in GREX, we really tie everything back to key metrics. We tie everything back to the North Star metric. And with every workflow that we build, there's an efficiency estimated savings. So you can instantly see, I've ran this for a month. This is the amount of hours I've saved. This is the results I've driven. And hopefully you can then compare that back to your sort of manual process and way of doing that before you start the system. So there's quite easy ways to prove that in a 90-day period, easily done, I would say.
It's a nice little feature. I quite like that. Again, I don't normally do this for promotion purposes, but like with GREX, like what does engaging with you look like based on that? Because on another interview I did with Derek, he like does like instead of these like long engagements of 6, 12 months, all this sort of stuff, it's like we're now moving to a workflow kind of model. Does your company mirror that kind of model
It does. So at the moment, we're still launching in the market. So we have design partner program, which has a base rate of 2.5K. And for that, you get access to a growth strategist and an AI engineer to help build out these workflows for you. And if your team are actually operating the workflows that we build for you, then there's no additional cost of using GREX. But if you do start to want to layer on one of our team to actually be that accountable person running that system for you, so you want that growth expert in the loop, you want that content expert to run the LinkedIn ads, you want that SEO expert to run the SEO loop, you want that GEO expert to run the GEO system, that's when you start to just layer on the sort of cost per workflow that we're operating on a monthly basis. That's the way we're pricing at the moment. To be honest, the level of data that we're pulling back in and that efficiency gaining data that we have as well in terms of hours saved is where we want to move to into a pricing model, a value-based pricing model where we say, actually, we charge you based on X number of outputs, X amount of hours saved, or even X amount of results driven. At the moment, we don't have the sophisticated setup to be able to plug that back into our pricing model at the moment, but hopefully in a few months' time, that's the direction that we're heading in.
For sure, I can see that happening. Okay, cool. That was a nice little side tangent. Question 6 came in from previous guest Alex Humphreys, my good friend Alex over at Ulterior. He asked, what one piece of advice would you give your past self at the start of your marketing journey?
To be honest, I actually have already given this advice on this call, which is defer to experts as soon as you can afford to bring them in. It's just that was just for me the unlock that started to drive significant growth in my first business. It's now what we founded Growth Division on, where you bring in experts to validate channels to market and run them for you. It's now what we're also doing with GREX, where we bring experts in the loop who have that year's worth of knowledge. That knowledge is very hard fought and it is very, very valuable. So it's bringing that knowledge into your business as soon as possible to be able to truly run channels for you at high efficiency is basically what I would have done earlier if I had learned it in that first business, for sure.
That is strong advice. I actually learned how to run roundtables, like ABM roundtables, from Alex as well. And completely just gave the whole ABM Answered community another gear. So fully back that. Question 7 came in from Michael Whitaker over at Trumpet. Good company that. He asked, with so many new AI-driven data points, which conversion metrics are you actually moving? Which metrics are actually moving the needle for you right now?
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know if there are more data points. There's always been a ridiculous amount of data points within marketing, and that's also why it's so complex. I suppose it's just now with AI, there's a ability to sort of connect up all of these data points much more easily. I would still say, and I've already mentioned it again on this, that the main metric you need to be tracking and looking at is your North Star metric. And then how do all your sub-level metrics, your level 1 metrics, your level 2 metrics track back up to and ladder back up to that North Star metric? That's the way you need to think about growth, right? It's like, what's the key metric that we're trying to have an impact on? And then how are our sub-level metrics pushing up towards that core North Star metric? That's the way I always think about growth metrics. So I think irrespective of if there's new data points coming in from AI or not, that's the way that you need to structure your way of thinking.
For sure. And also what you said in the question 1 about kind of looking inwards and looking at your own data, like that proprietary data, the answers are there rather than I think necessarily relying on third party. Because I think I don't really get anxiety, but like I'm personally getting overwhelmed by all the stuff you hear online, all the different signals. So like kind of putting the blinkers on probably makes the most sense. Tristan, you've been great. The only final question I have is, do you have a question for our next few guests?
Yeah, I am always interested when I speak to marketers about what is the growth initiative that they've implemented that they're most proud of. So that might be, what was the initiative that got the best results for you? Or what was like the most creative initiative? But I'm just interested always in hearing like specific case studies of what did you do and why did you really love and why are you proud of that and what were the results of that?
Nice. Do you want to put a time frame on that as well? Or can we go back to like the early days of email marketing and they hit?
I think since the dawn of time, let's do it.
Dawn of time. Right. Okay. Get some biblical figures on the pod.
Yeah.
Right, Tristan, thanks so much for joining.